Hello, and welcome to the Gravel Ride podcast, where we go deep on the sport of gravel cycling through in-depth interviews with product designers, event organizers, and athletes who are pioneering the sport. I'm your host, Craig Dalton. I'm going to be joined shortly by my co-host, Randall Jacobs, for another episode of In the Dirt. Before we get started, I need to thank this week's sponsor, Hammerhead, and the Karoo 2 computer. Hammerhead's been a long-term sponsor of the show, and you probably have recalled me mentioning that when you use the code TheGravelRide at hammerhead.io and add a custom color kit and a free water bottle into your cart, you're going to get those items in free in addition to your Karoo 2 computer that you'll be purchasing. Well, I've finally got my custom color kit, and I had an opportunity to install it, and I wanted to bring up a couple points. One, super easy to install. Two, just super cool. You know, in a world where most cycling computers are only black or gray, I thought it was a really innovative design for them to put this ability to change color. I ended up getting a white color kit, so my computer's black and white, kind of like a penguin or a tuxedo. I was grappling with some of the other colors, but felt like switching between my bikes, white was going to be a good choice, but I'm super stoked by the way it looks. So that was a hell of a lot of fun. So I wanted to mention that to you. Before we talk about some of the amazing attributes of the Karoo 2, I've been talking time and time again about how much in love I am with the climbing feature. The climbing feature will actually bring the hill climb right onto your dashboard of your computer as you approach it. In previous iterations of the software, you needed to download a GPS file in order for it to interpret it. But they've done a software upgrade, and now as you approach a hill, you'll see the gradients, you'll see the distance to the top, you'll see the elevation to the top, which I find super cool from a pacing perspective. That brings me back to another point that I've always been super excited about the Hammerhead Karoo 2, those software updates. Every 2 weeks, I think it is, I get an email from Karoo saying, hey, we've got a new version of the software. And sometimes it's minor updates, but other times it's these big new features that you're getting for free. Anyway, I hope you'll go over to hammerhead.io and check out the Karoo 2. I know you'll be impressed with what they've put in this tiny package. For a limited time, our listeners can get a free custom color kit and exclusive premium water bottle with purchase of a Hammerhead Karoo 2. Just visit hammerhead.io right now and use the promo code TheGravelRide to get yours today. This is an exclusive limited time offer only for our podcast listeners, so don't forget to use that promo code TheGravelRide after adding that free custom color kit and premium water bottle into your cart with the Karoo 2. With that behind us, let's jump right into my discussion with Randall Jacobs in this week's edition of In the Dirt. Hey buddy, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, my friend. It's been a little bit. How you been?
I know. It's been good. I mean, I can't say I've been riding a bicycle, which is always a little bit sad in my life when I'm not getting out because I don't have a lot of other athletic outlets that I'm pursuing these days. It sort of bums me out when I'm not consistent on the bike in any given week. But beyond that, I'm doing all right.
All right. I have been finally getting back on the bike. Been test riding a new set of wheels that we are hopefully launching in the very near future. And otherwise, like enjoying the New England early spring, which is a mix of cold weather and then some beautiful, beautiful days with the flowers coming out and the birds chirping. So
do you find yourself more motivated to get outside when those days appear?
Absolutely. Though not necessarily riding. I've been doing a lot of walking and hiking and canoeing, which has been delightful. But been going on some shorter rides with my brother-in-law, and I'm going to start planning some ridership meetups here in the New England area in the not too distant future.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I find like the consistency of the weather in California makes it so that you're not like as driven to get outside on any given nice day, even though for God's sake, like Mill Valley and the fog where I live, like I really should be pursuing any good weather window that I can.
I mean, the terrain in the Bay Area is such that it's always pretty motivating to get out regardless of the time of year. Whereas in New England, we have some great riding near where I am in the Waltham area outside of Boston. But it's not Mount Tam overlooking the Pacific Ocean, just outside of SF. So, that's a contrast for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess one nice thing that underscores my continued enthusiasm for gravel cycling, I look at my bikes in the garage and I just want to ride them. Like I know
Mm.
there's so much adventure out there, and I'm still so stoked to ride a gravel bike these days and this summer. Yeah, I guess I'm in the right place doing this podcast with you.
Yeah. Well, and I'm excited too as the season progresses out here to get up to Vermont, to get up to New Hampshire. We have quite a few riders in the Hudson Valley area, so organizing a ride out there too, which is fantastic. Like the Catskills are stunning, and there's just so much in terms of like local agriculture and festivals and stuff like that to enjoy as well when out there. So there's good riding ahead, easing into it this season as the weather allows.
Yeah, I don't think you and I have chatted much since you came out to California for Sea Otter. For the listener, they probably know I published a couple episodes that were Sea Otter related, did a little bit of a
Mhm.
roundup episode, which was just me kind of touching base with a bunch of people in the industry, seeing what they got going on in their booths and generally catching up with people. And then the second one, I did an episode with Michelle Duffy from Lifetime and the Lifetime Grand Prix series. So those have been published since we've spoken last. But you and I had a nice trip out there. I mean, it was just nice to kind of have that energy of Sea Otter and see all the enthusiasm around new
Yeah.
products and just the companies being out there in front of the public and the riders.
Well, and it's an event that the format, yes, Sea Otter is still very commercial, right? It's a bunch of brands with booze, they have product to sell and so on. But unlike a lot of trade shows, it's a lot more than that. There's an excitement around the events. The people are genuinely excited to actually go to those booths. So it's consumer facing as opposed to what we used to have with Interbike, which was very industry facing. And so you didn't, as a consumer, get the consumer. I hate that word. Just consuming stuff as an enthusiast, as somebody who's really interested in this stuff, you could go and talk to the people behind it. That's something I love, and it seemed to be like the festival seemed to be thriving. It felt very much like it did pre-COVID,
Yeah.
which was great.
Yeah, 100%. I got to demo the wheel set you're working on, the 700C version in the La Gravilla
Yeah,
gravel race on Sunday. I You had given me the choice of riding 650B and 700C, and I was like, I've got these 700C tires I could throw on there that were in the garage that were 700 by 40. So I said, give me the 700s. And normally almost always riding the 650Bs unless I'm got a road wheel set on.
yeah.
It was the wrong choice. I mean, those wheels held up wonderfully, and if you were looking for someone to absolutely abuse them, I think I did a good job of that because it was very much a mountain bikey style course.
Mm.
And, with 700 by 40, I definitely would have appreciated the larger volume tire that I can run with the 650Bs.
Which is interesting because I recall many years ago doing the cross country race, and thinking to myself, I could do this on a drop bar mountain bike, rigid, most of it. So it seems like I was not able to find any of that chunder except for braking bumps on some of the descents and parts of the course. But were there rocks or anything else like that you were finding, or?
Yeah, there was a few little rock guardy type sections. I didn't. I saw a couple of people crash around me. It was just a lot of single track with a lot of braking bumps. I mean, I think that's the
Yeah,
downside about the event being as big as it is. Like 3 days, 4 days into the festival, you've had thousands of bikes
yeah,
on
yeah,
those
yeah.
trails. So I think that day being the last day of the event, like we definitely suffered from more braking bumps than usual. So it
And
was
braking
tricky,
bumps always
go
suck.
ahead.
Like there's not a
Yeah.
single bike that braking bumps are fun on. It's just it
Yeah.
on a dual suspension, long travel bike, they suck less, but they're never good.
I was kicking myself because I did have a bike at home in the garage with a gravel suspension fork on it, and it
Mm,
totally
mm.
would have been the call. And
Yeah, yeah.
I had a lot going through my mind because further on my mind as I was getting the crap beat out of me was I also hadn't reinstalled my Redshift stem. So I was
Mm.
going on narrower tires. I had removed the Redshift stem, which I usually count on for a little bit of suspension on the front end. So all across the board, I was getting the crap beat out of me. That said, I had a good time. And I mentioned this, I think, in my episode with Michelle Duffy from Lifetime. Like, I, for one, appreciate gravel courses that are technically challenging and are pushing just different sort of levers of your skill set as a cyclist, because I just think the sport needs that. We should
Yeah.
have, the entire spectrum from mixed surface rides that have, predominantly road riding, like some of the grasshoppers that spatter in 40% dirt, to things
Hmm.
like this, which are, 100% and dirt and very technical.
Yeah. It was also really great to connect with friends there too. Again, it having been so with COVID, like the trade shows haven't been happening. So I have a lot of friends in the industry who, they're product developers or engineers or other founders or so on, and just to reconnect. Like it's an industry where people know each other, and there's a lot of very close personal friendships that are developed over the years of meeting people at trade shows, and maybe you collaborate on something, maybe you don't, but the end of the day, like it's an industry that tends to be less cutthroat and a lot more collaborative, even amongst competing companies. And that's something that I missed and got a nice taste of too. Plus, we saw some fellow podcasters and content creators and so on, a bunch of journalists there as well too. So it was great to connect there too.
Yeah,
Zach over
exactly.
at Gravel Bike California.
It's kind of like summer camp. It's just like one of those things, like you see the people that you met, probably maybe haven't seen for a year, and then you run into them, and there's just this great congeniality to those encounters, as you
Yeah.
were mentioning. Yeah.
Anyone
So there was
listening, if
also
you ever have an opportunity to go to Sea Otter in Monterey, I do think it's one of those experiences. Like it is the sort of thing where um, it's a special event, and it's still a special event after all these years, I find.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Like I have this inclination, particularly for events that I'm riding, towards newness. Like as much as I
Mm,
love some of the things I've done, I do like to put new ones on the calendar because, as a family man, I don't have unlimited weekends to go off and do races. So oftentimes I've got to
yeah.
pick, the two or three that I'm going to be able to do in a year. And it's hard because as much as I love going back for that summer camp feeling, and again, like testing yourself against a course that you already know is amazing, like I do tend towards new events, and I'm always conflicted. I'm always
Yeah.
conflicted on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was some professional racing that went on, and I mentioned this, and we talked about it with Michelle Duffy from the Lifetime Grand Prix as it was the kickoff to that event. And we won't drill into it too much, but Mariah Wilson won on the gravel. It's really a cross country mountain bike race, which was the first
Hmm.
race of this Lifetime Grand Prix, and they were riding mountain bikes. And Keegan Swenson won the second one, and then Mariah's having a smashing spring campaign because she just won BWR San Diego as well,
Oh wow.
which on paper they're two dramatically different races, right? The the Sea Otter Classic was a cross country mountain bike race, and BWR is a road race with some significant gravel sections in it. So pretty
Hmm.
cool to see. I'm a fan of Mariah. She was on the podcast earlier the year. She lives in San Francisco at this point, but also used to live in Mill Valley. So great to see her kicking off the season with a lot of gusto.
Yeah.
And then on the men's side, Alexi Vermillon finally got a big victory on at BWR. It's funny, I was introduced to him last year at Envy as the fastest guy you don't actually know yet,
Mm,
and super nice guy from Michigan. Did a bunch of road racing earlier on in his career, and I think this is going to be a breakout year for him.
very cool. Yeah, this miss those days a little bit. Chasing. I
Yeah,
wish gravel racing was a thing back in my days. I find that the format is it's just a lot of fun, and there's just so much variety versus the cross country, which tends to be more focused.
yeah, yeah. It is changing a bit. I heard some people commenting about like how important the start was in at any Sea Otter event. Like you really had to come out of the gate quickly.
Hmm.
Um, which that was one thing that sort of pushed me out of mountain bike racing. Like I just got
Hmm.
annoyed that you should be on like a trainer and spinning your legs out, and you had to get onto the start line. If you weren't first, in the first row or the first couple rows, you were pretty much hosed unless you had exponentially more power than the rest of the field.
Even then, an anecdote, like I have experience. The elite field one year was like 160 people or something like that, and I was lined up 130th. The one year I did like a UCI, the one time I did a UCI race. And yeah, exactly that. Like you're not even the people who are in the front are already at the single track, the trailhead, by the time you're moving off the back. Like there's this huge slinky effect. And then you have all this single
Yeah.
track where there's nowhere to pass. The only place to pass is on a climb. Oftentimes you're on this climb where you're taking the shoulder to get around people. And so, at best, like a top elite athlete might be able to pick their way up, 2/3 of the field or something. But there's so much blocking and everything else that yeah, I'm fully with you in that frustration with those types of courses.
Yeah. And I remember thinking to myself as I was mountain bike racing and I dabbled a little bit in road racing, it was so nice that when a road race start gun went off, you know, people were slowly clipping
Yeah.
in. They weren't doing anything quickly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Though I have been to crits where somebody went off the gun and tried to lap the field. There's
Yeah.
always that
Yeah.
too.
I'm not gonna lie, like I wouldn't when I raced a few crits in Colorado, I wasn't opposed to going early because it was literally the only time I was gonna be in the front of the race. So if there was an early preem, I was happy to bury myself for it. And again, not to toot my own horn, but I did win a Frosty from a local a local ice cream shop in one crit in Boulder.
I mean, just go ahead and brag, Craig. I mean, that's a big deal. What flavor did you get?
I think I want cookies and cream.
Good choice. Good choice.
Yeah, yeah.
All
So
right. So
another thing I wanted, yeah,
oh,
I
go
wanted
ahead.
to chat with you. I just was going to say I wanted to chat with you about a bike that came across my desk this week. Interested, again, always interested to get your perspective, and always interested for the listener just to kind of contextualize trends we're seeing in the industry and new bikes coming out. So the bike is from Felt, and it's the
Mhm.
Breed Carbon. And frankly, I'd been a little bit surprised that um, Felt did not have a carbon gravel bike that was kind of on point in their lineup over the last couple of years. Because I remember when the Trans Rockies Gravel Royale race was announced, they announced a Felt partnership, and I was thinking to myself, this has to include a new bike because nothing against their other Breed models, but the carbon model is what I think people were looking for. So, have you had a
Mhm.
chance to take a look at this bike?
Yeah, so I'm looking at it right now, and what do you want? Well, what were your impressions first off before I dive
Yeah,
in with mine?
I mean, first impressions were that, it's on point with the industry today. I think they've taken a slightly distinct point of view with the tube dimensions and shapes that gives it sort of a rather unique look to it.
Mhm.
I'm obviously pro bikes. Think it's progressive to have big tire accommodations. They've got a little bit of suspension dampening around the collar of the seat post, which I think is interesting and useful. They've made it so that it is dropper capable and dropper ready, which I
Mhm.
think is great. The front end's really clean. I think they did a beautiful job with the paint job. So I think it's again on point as an option for gravel cyclists, particularly with a little bit more orientation towards the adventure side of the sport.
Yeah, I see. I think the aesthetics are generally well executed. Tube shapes and proportions are nice. It's pleasing to look at. They have a 420, I believe, axle to crown fork on there, which is, for those who don't know their fork geometry numbers offhand, that's for suspension fork corrected. So you could put a suspension fork from Fox or RockShox on there, and it
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's
change the geometry.
I think that's super interesting just to kind of nail that point home as you and I talked about this in an earlier in the dirt episode as we were evaluating my own personal custom bike that I'm
Mhm.
having built.
Yeah.
And from a design perspective, is there any downside to having that additional axle to crown height?
Uh, the main things I can think of would be um, it can be hard to get the aesthetics right. So you're going to end up with a bigger gap, especially if you want something that's more of a one bike. So if you want to put road wheels on there, the radius of those wheels is going to be significantly less than say a 2.9er by 2.0, right? So you're going to end
Yep.
up with a bigger gap. You're going to end up with a shorter head tube. So torsional flex at the head tube is going to be greater with ceteris paribus. So the only way around that is to reinforce it with more carbon up there. But those aren't major issues. In the case of your bike, what we did was we essentially said when you put a suspension fork on this bike, we're also assuming that you're going to be riding more technical terrain and would like a slightly more slacked out geo. And so we optimize your geo for a slightly shorter fork, rigid fork, and then just assumed like it would be slightly taller when you put the fork on. And it actually changes the characteristics in a way that's desirable. I don't think this is neither here nor there, but what I think they got right is if you're going to have a suspension corrected fork length, I think the aesthetics and the way that it's integrated here, the proportionality of the bike is quite nice. And you don't always
Yeah.
see that on bikes like this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do imagine this is going to start to become more of a trend and a selling attribute for bikes. I know talking to the team at Otso, they've been telling me that their bikes have been suspension corrected for a couple of years now, and I
Mm-hmm.
think we're starting to see more mainstream brands think about it. Obviously, you've got a number of options on forks now, from the RockShox fork to the Fox. SR Suntour has a gravel fork. Um, was one other I'm forgetting. Anyway, they're out there and they're
They're out there.
starting to become viable options for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a nice to have, like buying a bike that's suspension corrected if you don't want the handling to change if you add a fork. Um, it is also possible to design a bike where when like we did with yours, when you add a fork, the handling is still has desirable characteristics for that more rugged mode with the fork.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's one thing I liked. Let's see, T47 bottom bracket. That's a good standard. They do it slightly differently. The bearing offset is slightly asymmetrical, but people shouldn't be afraid by that. It just means you use more or less spacers on the cranks, so it doesn't affect compatibility. It's not a new standard. I like the mounts that they have, extra mounts on the down tube for being able to put a third bottle in the larger sizes.
Yeah,
Uh,
there was a lot of mounts. I was surprised I saw the number of eyelets. So you think by looking at it on a larger size, you might be able to stack two bottle cages?
yeah, I actually see that in one of their diagrams.
Okay.
It might be the smaller bottles, but I'm seeing one on the bottom of the down tube, two on the top of the down tube, one on the seat tube. I'm not sure what size that is, but yeah, it's a nice to have. I don't think it's absolutely critical, but it's definitely a nice to have.
Yeah, agreed.
So, all right, anything that you disliked about it?
I mean, I'd have to dig in more
Yeah.
to that. The only thing that popped out to me was the way they route the cables
Mhm.
into the center of that tube. I was It didn't immediately dawn on me why you would want to do that. It seems like putting it a little bit to the side or the bottom gives you cleaner cable lines.
Yeah, I really don't like this way of doing things. I don't know if the current one does, but like the original 3T Explorer did the same thing, and
Yeah.
it just results. Even with wireless electronic shifting, you still have the rear brake hose going in there, and you just have this big chunky exposed hose going all the way in and potentially rubbing on the head tube. I think that it should go into the top of the head tube and drop in to the down tube from there. And then if you have mechanical shifting, there's going to be a bunch of binding in that, just given how it's routed. Like there's no way to get a clean run through the frame, and so I think that the routing there is a miss as well.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. How about you?
Um,
Any other dislikes on it?
so this, there's a system, like a shim system that if you use a 27-2 seat post, it introduces a little bit more flex, so like an elastomer or something in there. I don't like how it's executed. It uses basically a shim that compresses the seat post in a way that could be uneven, so like could result in binding or in a dropper post or slippage. I don't know if this one is going to have those issues, but I've seen those issues come up constantly. I really don't like non-traditional style seat clamps. If you look for a bike that has a seat clamp that goes around the collar, um, let's see, it's not really a one bike, but not everyone who's buying this is looking for that. But the wheelbase is a little bit long, the head tube is a little bit slacker than what you'd want for a bike that is designed to be used with 700 by 30 tires as well. It could be done, but it's definitely outside of what I would consider still within the endurance road range. um, it's still using 29er tires on the like 700 by 2.0 or 29 by 2.0 on the smaller sizes. I think that smaller sizes should be built around 650B because toe overlap and slacking out geos and things like that. And then it's just expensive. It's 5,000 plus bucks for GRX mechanical. better have carbon wheels for that price. I don't see a full spec list here yet.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Valid points. Valid points for the buyer or would-be buyer. I do think the overall package and aesthetics and the way this bike looks is probably going to excite a lot of people, even with
yeah.
some of those little minor things that could be improved.
Well, and I should say the pricing is not out of line with what we're seeing from a lot of major brands generally. There's been significant inflation in the market and a trend towards more premium, but what you get for the
Yeah.
extra money is not always clear.
Yeah, I actually was listening in on an economist speak today about some of the things going on in China, and not to derail this entirely, but it does look like the supply chain is going to remain messy across every industry for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode, my friend. I've been in the
I
muck
know
with that heavily. Was on a call this morning actually with one of our vendors. So yeah, that's something I can give
it's
you some info on.
it's crazy. I mean, we won't derail the conversation with that, but gosh, I was like, yet again, another 9 months of uncertainty around the supply chain, and we're talking about whether you're getting food products, bicycle products, computer products, you name it, we're going to have some effects remaining throughout the rest of the year. So I guess this is another time that if you can get your hands on a bike or a product, do it when you can.
Speaking of which, may I make a small plug here?
Yeah, you bet.
So we now have bikes in stock, ready to be custom built to rider spec, and we also just brought back our Bring a Friend program. So basically, if you are an existing thesis rider, you can invite your friend. We'll give them $300 off. If you're not an existing thesis rider, you find a friend to get a bike at the same time, or a frame set, or one of our a la carte builds. We'll honor it there too. Then we'll give both of you $300 off your thesis. So that brings it down to $3,700 with electronic shifting and a really high quality aluminum wheel set. So if you're looking for a bike, thesis.bike, there's a link in the header there, and we can have a personal conversation about your next bike.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good tip and good timing on that. Like I said, I honestly feel like if you need a bike and you need a Grupo, like bring out, if your purchase was going to be in the next like 3 to 5, 6 months, do whatever you can to bring that purchase in just to get a bike. Cause I think the bike industry slightly got back on top of the supply chain, and there's a bit of inventory in the channel now. But I suspect like come midsummer and towards the end of the summer, we're going to be all like scratching our heads in pain about we can't get chains, we can't get brake pads and things like that.
Well, and there's a lot of uncertainty too, as pretty much everyone I would imagine is aware, in just the geopolitical situation, which could spill over into supply chains out of Asia as well, for again reasons that would be a whole nother episode too. Um,
Yeah.
and by the way, if you're looking for guidance on bikes to look at, the Ridership is a great place for that too. Another plug there. There's a lot of conversation where people post like, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting this, or I'm going to build up that," and it's been remarkable the quality of feedback and just the kindness and helpfulness that's been emerging within the community. So any of our members who are listening, thank you. It's amazing to see. It's we just set it up, and then all of you took it and made it your own. And if you're not in there yet, go to theridership.com and sign up.
Yeah. You're so good at the plugs today, Randall.
It's I send people there all the time, and it's a labor of love. Like I cannot believe what it has become, and just the kindness that's fostered there. I'd love to do more
Yeah.
with it and expand it.
Same here. I mean, I know my enthusiasm for it has always been slightly selfish. Like, I just always wanted a place that if I was going to LA or Palm Springs or Tucson, like I could put a note in there and some local can tell me about a route or a bike shop or something. And it has that in spades, and
Yeah.
it's just totally a free resource for the community. So yeah.
Well, and I learned so much too. Like one person, no matter how much long they've been in the industry, how many things they've ridden, can only know so much. So like whenever somebody reaches out, like one of our riders will send a message like, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this event, and what tires should I get?" I was like, "Go to the Ridership." "What bike packing bag should I get?" well, here's a couple companies that I know do a good job, but go to the Ridership because they have looked at every single possible option. As you well know, because
Yeah,
you bought your bag from another Ridership member who had it custom built for their thesis.
indeed I did.
Yeah. So
So we're about winding down our time for today, but I know you wanted to sort of have a little bit of a quick discussion on some products that are coming out and just kind of how consumers should be looking at products and attributes as they're vocalized in the press.
yeah, I'm going to informally call this the Randall's rants section, maybe. Um, so you know, I don't know if I've spoken about it on the pod, but like the perils of weight weanism and how like an obsessive focus on weight can result in ignoring other things that are really important. And this is wheels are one example, and you can end up compromising on things like aluminum nipples which seize and tend to split and fail. So you save 40 grams versus brass, or rims that compromise on width or that don't include a bead hook when you need them to be safe on a tubeless road setup. There's all these things. But if you're going to make a claim about the weight of your product, make it an accurate claim. And if you're reporting on the weight of a product, make it actually weigh the product and put that in your headline versus the manufacturer's claims. There's a set of wheels that came out claiming 1,270 grams. The two articles that I saw, one weighed them at 1350, the other weighed them at 1363. And so even if I assume like, okay, that maybe they're not including the tape and the valve stems, well, that's 20 or so grams. Let's be generous, 25 grams per wheel. There's 50 grams per wheel. We're still not at 1270. Let's say that, we take in manufacturing tolerances on the weight of the rim, which can be as much as 5% on the rim. Well, even that, we're still not quite there. And we could even take into account something ridiculous like, there's a 0.7% variation in the strength of the gravitational pull of the earth, depending on where you're located. So let's say that, like, even then I don't get there. And so I saw a lot of headlines that cited these wheels at 1,270 grams. It's like, no, they're not, and they're $2,500. And that's a whole nother question. Like, is there what do you get for a $2,500 wheel set versus some wheels that are coming in considerably less but utilizing the same technology? So that's my rant for the day. Like, don't be a weight weenie, but if you're going to obsess about weight, don't believe the hype. Look at the actual measured weights, and expect that your sources should do so as well.
Yeah, those are good tips. It's funny, I consider weight. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I've also learned as a gravel cyclist to move away from that
Yeah.
because durability, particularly the way and where I ride, so much more important than weight. And frankly, and this has been the case my entire life, like there's definitely plenty of weight I can drop a lot less inexpensively off my body than my bike.
Yeah. 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 No, and there's certain things like for consumer grades, for consumer, what a terrible word, for like the general public, that is not sponsored, that doesn't have a team car driving up behind them. Some grams are just not worth saving. Like having a super lightweight frame built with ultra high modulus carbon means that it's going to be more brittle. So if you crash, it's gonna fail more likely to fail. Aluminum nipples don't do it. There's various other things that fall into. Maybe I'll write an article at some point about like all the ways not to save weight on your bike. We'll do
Yeah,
we'll
I
do,
think that'd
we'll
be
do an
interesting.
episode at some point.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. And yeah, definitely put that out into the ridership. I think it'd be interesting to get people's feedback and maybe lifetime experience of things that they, routes that they thought they should go down to save weight on their bike and where they've ultimately ended up.
Remember Drillium? That hyper
No.
advanced material that was basically whatever material the component came in, with holes drilled in
Uh,
it.
I just
Yeah.
remember back in the early days of mountain biking, everybody like replacing every single bolt on their bike for lighter weight, either titanium or aluminum bolts, and the Herculean efforts people went through to lose weight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. While at the same time, like not getting a bike fit and like not optimizing the weight of their body, or taking care of the things that actually matter to make you faster or maybe prioritize the quality and enjoyment of the ride experience.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I do think that last statement is something that the gravel industry has done a good job of, at least orienting itself around the enjoyment and pleasure of gravel riding versus, ultimate performance or ultimate
yeah,
lightweightness.
though
Yeah.
though the aero claims and all that are starting to filter into gravel as well. So we'll do our part with the rant section of the podcast now to try to keep things honest.
I'm going to have to muster up some anger so I can rant about things.
Not anger. It's more just like, well, just want people to know. And
Yeah.
certainly hold me
Yeah.
accountable if I ever get something wrong too, everyone who's listening.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that place to let Randall know how you feel, and me for that matter, is in the ridership. Just come
a, pub,
and leave a comment.
a public forum set up specifically so that listeners can tell me where I got things wrong.
On that
That's
note,
great.
because we want everybody to tell Randall what he's gotten wrong this week. Great to
Good to
catch
see.
up for a few. I actually got to jump on the mic for another recording right now. We'll see you soon.
Good to see you, my friend. Be well.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of In the Dirt from the Gravel Ride podcast. Thanks for spending a little bit of your week with us this week. If you're interested in giving us any feedback or have any interest in volleying over some ideas for future episodes, please join the Ridership. That's www.theridership.com. It's a free global cycling community and the best way to get feedback to myself and Randall. If you're able to support the show, please visit buymeacoffee.com/thegravelride. Or if you have a moment, ratings and reviews are hugely important to the podcast game, so I appreciate those as well. Big thanks to this week's sponsor, Hammerhead. Make sure to check out the Karoo 2 computer over at hammerhead.io and use that promo code TheGravelRide. That's going to do it for this week. Until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.